Okay, so now, my pleasure to introduce Pat O, formerly from Fullerton, currently from Redlands.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Wow, that's fun. My name is Pat, I'm an alcoholic. Grateful to be sober, grateful to be here. Thank you for asking me to participate in my recovery. It's good to see friends. I remember one time I came to this meeting, I don't know, sometime in COVID or something. It was real weird. I got a call. It was like, hey, come to Ventura. I was like, we're inside. I got all excited, and I was like, oh, this is cool. It felt like the Wild Wild West. We were breaking all the rules, and it was outdoors. I think it was in January or something. I was freezing. I was late, so thanks for that experience. That was cool, and I want to welcome our new friends to Alcoholics Anonymous, those that identified as being new, welcome. And those that didn't identify, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember coming to AA, I didn't know I was an alcoholic, you know what I mean? Like, how are you supposed to know? I didn't know, I came here and they would ask for newcomers. I'd be like, yeah, I'm new, and they point to me and I'm like, my name is Pat and I'm an addict, not in AA or not, Okay, there's an addict here, let's get him out of AA, I'm like, fucking flip the old guy off, try to piss him off, and slam the door, make all the ruckus. And no one ever followed me out and said, hey, kid, here's a big book. Take this home or to your bush or wherever you're living. Maybe you might have alcoholism, And I'd go out there and I'd die. And I'd come back to Alcoholics Anonymous, not identifying because I didn't want the judgment in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I would sit in here and I'd listen to your story and I would think, you know what? I drink like that guy. And I listened to this lady, and I was like, I think like she thinks, you know what I mean? She's really crazy, but I'm not as crazy as her, And I started to like, you know what, maybe, sitting here not raising my hand as a newcomer. And then I would raise my hand. Finally, I had the courage to raise my hand. I'm like, I'm Pat, I'm an alcoholic and an addict. And then they all turn around, put $2 in the basket. Some were sicker than others, you know what I mean? I'm like, fuck you, man, And I'd slam the door, and no old guy ever followed me out and said, hi, I'm Bob, want to go to Polly's Pies? Let me tell you my story, and I'd go out there and I'd die, and I'm so grateful when I reached out for help on the 23rd of October of 2002. I was met by a man who had a working knowledge of this big book, and he understood the responsibility statement in Alcoholics Anonymous, that when anyone, anywhere, reaches out for help, we want the hand of AA to be there, and for that I'm responsible. Like, I have a responsibility as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous to put my hand out to the new man and take him from the blank page to page 43 of the big book, identify my alcoholism in hopes that you're an alcoholic. And if you're an alcoholic, we have a solution here for you in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I think it's also my responsibility that I know members of other fellowships, that I can take that new man and take him to another member of another fellowship and put his hand in the hand of another member, And I'm really grateful that I know that I'm an alcoholic, and I hope that I'm able to describe what that looks like. And, I told you my sobriety date, my sponsor is Mike S. We played phone tag today. He knows he's my sponsor. I think it's real important your sponsor knows, I mean, ask yourself, does mine know, And mine knows. He's very aware of it, I was at his meeting on Thursday, and I was having too much fun in the back, and he turned and looked at me, and I was like, ooh, I'm in trouble, And it's a real structured group, I'm grateful for the structure. My home group's the South Coast Speakers Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We meet on a Wednesday night at 7:30 in Laguna Beach. It's, very structured, very proper, and I learned how to grow up there. I learned how to put a tie on. I learned how to respect Alcoholics Anonymous. I learned all that stuff, and I'm grateful for the structure, And today is an interesting day. My mom passed away on this day, January 10th of 2019, and it's real emotional. And maybe we'll go there, and maybe we won't, but we'll see. So that's out there. I want to thank my friends for making the schlep. You know what I mean? Poor guy's heard my story way too many times. But thanks, and I was drinking coffee, and Kyle saw me like on my third cup. He goes, this is going to be an interesting talk. And so we'll see how it comes out. And, I got a little bit of that going on. Maybe I'll put this over here, a little too much. But I'm like the little kid in elementary school that smells like poopy pants and syrup. You know what I mean? I'm like super awkward. I'm just like, I'm a nail biter. Any other nail biters here? couple guys, right? Yeah, I'm just like nervous all the time, you know what I mean? Got one over here, I'm like flicking it, you know what I mean? Hope they don't catch me, you know? I'm so self-centered naturally, you know what I mean? I like, right before I got up, I'm like, I hope my zipper's up, you know? It is, don't trip, you know? And I check like 3 times, you know? And but I'm like a bedwetter, like a little kid bedwetter. Any other bedwetters here? No one's gonna admit it, you know? Yeah, I'm stuck by myself, you know what I mean? But I know shame and guilt like on a deep level, you know what I mean? I remember my mom, she'd be like, oh, like I'd get an invite for a sleepover, and my mom's like, oh my God, he has friends, you know, and I'm like terrified. I'm like, I don't want to go, you know what I mean? I don't want to go on a sleepover. And I try to convince my mom that I'm sick, I don't want to go, and she's like, you know, you're going, and everyone would fall asleep at the sleepover, and I would like, don't go to sleep, and I would be so terrified and so scared, you know, just sitting there, and I'd fall asleep, and I'd wake up in the morning, and I peed my friend's cushion, you know, and no more invite to the sleepover, you know, and but I know that like shame and that guilt long before I ever took my first drink, you know. Like I understand the loneliness of alcoholism, you know, in the big book it talks about a spiritual malady, right, this spiritual sickness. You know, and my spiritual sickness is I'm a right fielder on the baseball team. Any of the right fielders here? No, not here in Ventura. Not the Dodger fan, that's for sure, you know. And but I'm a right fielder, dude. And we all know it's the loser position, you know. Oh, man, it was like, you know, neighborhood sports. There's 2 team captains. They're usually the most popular kids, you know, and there's like 2 of us left, and the guy goes, I guess I'll take Pat. You know what I mean? And I'm in right field, and I don't know. I probably would have been diagnosed with ADD. They weren't passing out the pellets like they do today, you know what I mean? But I, like, wander off to left field. I'm like, what's going on over here? You know what I mean? The game's going on. The coach is yelling at me, the other side of the field, kid. I'm like, okay. You know, I'm looking for a dandelion. Somebody told me if I could blow off all those things, I can have a wish. You know what I mean? I'm like wishing for a different life out in left field, and coach is yelling at me, and I don't even realize the game's going on. Like, I'm so consumed with me, you know? And one time I was on second base. I don't know how I got there either, because I always struck out, you know? And I was on second base. I didn't know where I was. I was like looking around. I didn't know if I had the right cleats, the right socks. Was I wearing the jersey? I'm looking at your jersey. I'm looking at the kid cracked a line drive, and I ran back to first base. You know what I mean? Dude, it was like a triple play in the wrong direction, man. And, you know, little poopy pants back to the dugout. You know what I mean? Loser, you know, and as I'm walking in the dugout, all my friends are running out to go their position, and what I heard them say that day is, you're a failure, you're a loser, and you're no good. Right? Now, none of them said that, right? But that was the voice in my head long before I ever took my first drink. Failure, loser, you're no good. And I remember looking at my mom, and she's in the stands clapping. I mean, so proud of her kid, you know what I mean? She's like, yeah, you know, and not proud because I got a triple play in the wrong direction. My mom was proud it took me an hour to get out of that stupid car to go to that stupid field to play that stupid game one more time. And I remember looking at my mom that day saying, if I only had a dad, that had never happened. You know, I built a belief system that was going to separate me from you long before I ever took my first drink. And, you know, my mom's a blackout drinker, which means I'll never know who my dad is, you know, I mean, for all I know, my dad could be the cable guy. He's like, brown chicka brow now, you know, and she didn't even know she was in labor pregnant till she was in labor. She gave birth in her apartment, you know what I mean? The paramedic's like, you need to name him. And she's like, name what, you know? People always ask me, they're like, oh, your name's Patrick, you're Irish, right? No, my mom got pregnant in a blackout, gave birth. The paramedic's like, you need to name him. She named me Patrick. Her name's Patty, so she wouldn't forget my name, you know what I mean? And, you know, but that doesn't make me alcoholic. It's a cool story to tell in AA. You know, it's kind of funny, you know, because we understand, right? She thought she was constipated, so she called 911, right? You know, and but that doesn't make me alcoholic, you know. But I remember being a little boy looking outside my mom's apartment window, wondering if my dad was ever coming home. And I'd watch the car come down the street, man, and the car would never turn into my mom's apartment, you know. And I'd sit up every night, and I would fall asleep waiting for my dad to come home. And I remember being a little boy saying, if I don't have a dad, then there is no God. You know, my grandma took me to church. She loved Jesus, man. I remember church, she would get up, she'd be doing the, you know, thing. And I'd be like, Grandma, people are looking. She'd want to dance, you know. And, you know, what my grandma got in church, man, I didn't get the same thing in church. I didn't get that until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. But my grandma had the thing, you know, and I didn't understand what grandma was getting. And I signed off to the God idea long before. And when I got here, I told you I was an addict. And I remember my sponsor, we were reading the book, and he turned statements into questions. Right? And there's a part in the book where it talks about restless, irritable, and discontent. right? And he's reading this. He's like, restless, irritable, and discontent. And he talked about the effect produced for him when he put alcohol into his body. And he turned that statement into a question. And he asked me, he said, what is the effect for you when you put alcohol into your body? And I was like, I'm not alcoholic, defiance, I'm not going to be an alcoholic, And he said, well, I didn't ask you if you're alcoholic. He said, I asked you what's the effect produced by alcohol. And so I had to look at my story, and I had to look at the first time I drank alcohol. And the first time I drank alcohol, I was 9 years old. I was at an AA meeting with my mom, And my mom got sober when I was 11 months old. I literally grew up in AA every night of the week. I could recite chapter 5. I could recite the 12 traditions. At the end of the meeting, I was like, keep coming back. The old timers were like, we're saving this seat right here for you, kid. There's my seat. They knew, But I was 9. I was at a meeting in Laguna Beach. It was a Saturday night speaker discussion meeting. I remember like it was yesterday. And there was this guy, Rick A., and he was a chronic relapser. He had his eye patch on, he had a trench coat, he was pissed, and he smoked cigarettes. I remember one time he got this board, he goes, come with me, kids. And we followed him around outside. He put these nails in this board, and he put it behind the old timer's car, and he goes, I wonder how much serenity they have now, And, dude, he was a character. There's a lot of characters in AA. And when you grew up in AA, my mom's like, here, go with Uncle Lynn off fishing. I go off with this weirdo AA guy fishing, And Lynn Wilder was my basketball coach when I was a kid, But that's just how I grew up, And these kids, we were messing with him, and I threw a pebble at him, and he grabbed me, and I kicked him in the shin like I always did. And we ran outside this hospital, and we ran between the 3rd and the 4th story of that hospital. It was a parking structure. And those kids were 14, and those kids pulled out a bottle of Jose Cuervo. And I didn't know what alcohol was going to do to me or for me, but at 9 years old, I was already worst case scenario fear, right? I knew immediately that if I didn't drink it, those kids weren't going to like me. And the bottle came around. I took a pull off that bottle. I hated the taste. It was disgusting. I spit it out, and I was overcome with fear, and that fear told me that I wasn't going to be like the rest of my life. And the bottle went around the second time, and I got that bottle the second time, and I talked myself into holding that tequila down. And I can tell you the exact effect alcohol has on this alcoholic body in that moment when I put that alcohol down, all that fear went away. In that moment, I felt like I connected to those kids. In that moment, I felt a part of. Now, I didn't know that at 9 years old. I learned that when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and I looked at my alcoholism, right? And so what alcohol does for me, I can't get booze at mom's because she's going to AA. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to get booze at mom's, But I remember, I can tell you that by the time I was in high school, now I grew up in Mission Viejo, California. Anyone familiar with Mission Viejo? Okay, no gang members there, but it was 1990, and we were listening to Eazy-E and NWA and Ice Cube, and I had size 50 Dickies pulled all the way up. I had a 5XL sweatshirt on. I drank St. Ides out of a brown paper bag. I poured beer in the curve for the dead homies, I didn't have any dead homies, so I was getting ready for some, you know what I'm saying? Man, I'm like the director of the show. My friends were hungry. I created a plan like that fast, and they ended up robbing the pizza man with my stun gun, And the next day I get a call slip to go see the principal, and I took the fall on a crime I didn't even commit. I go to juvenile hall for a strong arm robbery that my friends did, And I'm terrified of what you think of me, so I take the fall for it, And but what happened for me was I got out of juvenile hall, and I leaned back, and I was like, "Orale, Holmes," And if you're new, right, this is called delusional. Awkward, poopy pants, bedwetter, nail biter, St. Ides, gang member. You know what I mean? And I'm trying to paint the picture, right, of the true character behind the podium, man. Terrified, coward, alcohol, power, And I got big friends, and I talk a lot of, you know what I mean? And you want to fight, and I'm like, yeah, get them. And my friends beat you up. I'll even get a little kick in there, sucker, And at 17 years old, my mom was 16 years sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she found a bottle of tequila, a bag of weed, and a little bag of cocaine, and she's like, you can't do this in my house. You know what I mean? I'm an active member of AA, And I heard, you need to hide it better. You know what I mean? Right. I didn't know I had a hearing problem. You know what I mean? And so I hid it better for another month or whatever. I come out of a blackout with my pants at my ankles, and I'm peeing all over my mom's fish tank, And she go to AA, and here's her son, an absolute wreck. And I come home a month later, and my mom, the doorbell's locked. I know I'm in trouble, And I'm like, oh my God, And I ring the doorbell, and my mom comes to the door, and she has a bottle of tequila in her hand and some weed, and she's like, you're kicked out. And I was 17 years old, and I walked in my mom's house, and I walked into my bedroom, and I packed my backpack, and I walked right by my mom, and I looked at her right in the eyes, and I said, I'm going to do everything I can to ruin your life. And I watched my mom's heart break right in that moment. You know, and I don't know how you deal with shame and guilt, man, but this alcoholic arrogance, man, I puffed my chest, I grabbed my mom by the collar, I slammed her against the wall, F you, I hate you, you're never going to see me again. And I turned around, I walked away, and I didn't call my mom for a year and a half because I was going to make her pay for that decision. And I can tell you, I already had alcoholism, I was already dying of a disease, I didn't know what it was from. Well, my mom said to me that night, she said, you can stay here and be sober or go out on those streets and get loaded, but you need to make a choice. And alcohol told me that I was kicked out of the house. My mom was my hero. My mom was my best friend. Alcohol told me to put my hands on my mom. Alcohol was already making decisions for me at 17 years old, though I didn't know it. And I didn't get sober till I was 27 years old. And this is a relation to my alcoholism. But what happened that night when I left that house, I went to an abandoned house where I was getting loaded at, and I took my first hit of crack cocaine at 17 years old. And that's the progression of my disease, just like that. And I didn't call my mom for a year and a half. Like, I was in San Francisco. I called my mom. I got hit by a truck. I said, Mom, I just got hit by a truck, and I don't know what to do. And she said, you need to go to the hospital. And I was like, well, how am I going to pay for the hospital, you know? And she said, you just give me an address, and I'll send them a check. And I was like, oh, no, Mom. They need cash. She's like, how am I going to send you cash? I'm in Orange County or in San Francisco. I said, there's a thing called Western Union right down the street from your work. My mom was so terrified, she ran down that Western Union and wired me $150 just like that. And a week later, guess what happened? Clumsy got in another accident. My mom wired me $150 just like that. And the next week, another $150. For the next 8 years, my mom would wire me $150 at least once a week, you know? Oh, man, this story's coming to me. So my friends, I don't know like what your friends were like, but like they just stopped inviting me places, you know what I mean? I was like too much, you know, and so I would just show up. Hey, how's it going, you know? I'm the guy with no money, you know what I mean? All my friends have money. They buy all the deal, you know. I suck off their alcohol, and so I showed up to a party, and my friend, he was talking to another friend, and he talked about wanting to get a pet monkey, you know what I mean? I was like, oh, they got pet monkeys in Tijuana. Yeah, oh, I know they don't have monkeys in Tijuana, but I want to drink in Tijuana, you know what I mean? And he's like, they do? I'm like, yeah, let's go right now, you know, and I rile him up, and off to TJ we go, you know what I mean? And when you get over the border, you got to get tacos, right? And when you get tacos, you got to get a Corona, right? And so now we're a couple Coronas in, and now we got to go to the pet store. Play the part, you know what I mean? And so we go to the pet store, and they say, no monkeys here, and we got to get another Corona in between pet stores. You know? So 15 pet stores later, we end up on Revolution Street at some nightclub, and I black out, you know? Now we're in blackout mode. And I come to in Huntington Beach at my house. I had overdosed on heroin in a bathtub, you know? And my friends are looking at me like, again? Right? That look of disappointment. Like, one more time? Like, this is why we don't want you around. And back on the street I go. And I was 25 years old. I was panhandling at this time. I'm a tenderloin kind of alcoholic. Anyone familiar with the TL? All right, some heads bobbing. Eddie and Jones. Yeah, Eddie. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. But I'd wander down to, like, Powell and Market where the cable car is so I can get some real money. You know what I mean? And this girl started talking to me. She started chatting it up with me. And I don't know, pretty soon I was like at her apartment, and she started detoxing me, you know, these kind of relationships. And when you're in these kind of deals, you fall in love like really quick. I'm like, oh my God, she loves me, you know, and she was like, I love her, you know, this is working out perfect. Untreated Al-Anon and untreated alcoholism, we're in for the ride, you know, and 45 days sober. I think normal living is a solution for alcoholism. I got a girlfriend, I got a place to live, like I feel good, right? And she's like, you need to get a job. And I was like, I thought this was for fun and for free, you know? And but I'm not an idiot, so I go get a job, and I get a job at the YMCA at an elementary school, after school program. I'm the assistant director. 45 days sober. the assistant director at an elementary school after-school program. And I thank my girlfriend for my life, dude. Like, I'm like, this is the best ever. And I show up that first day, and there's 200 kids, and they love Pat O. I can balance that chair on my chin. I can do whatever, you know. And I thank my girlfriend for my life. Like, thank you. Like, you brought me back from the dead. And I woke up in the morning, and she had a little brown bag lunch, you know what I mean? Now I'm, like, whistling to work, you know. I'm like, life is so beautiful. You know, 46 days sober. And I show up to that work, and this little second grader goes, hey, Mom. Or he goes, hey, Pat, come over. I want you to meet my mom. And I go meet his mom. He goes, Mom, this is my best friend, Pat. Now I got a best friend, you know what I mean? I got a girlfriend. I got a place to live. I got a best. Now I'm emotionally about a second grader, so we're perfect, you know what I mean? And I go home, I kiss my girlfriend, thank her for my life, you know, wake up in the morning, and I got my little brown bag lunch, and off to work I go. There's not a cloud in the San Francisco sky. There's no wind. I'm on that little elementary school field, and I'm pushing my best friend on this swing, you know what I mean? I am one with God, you know? And the thought crossed my mind that a bag of heroin would be a good idea. Just like that. Called who I need to get. He brought what I needed. He brought me a pint of tequila. I went into that elementary school bathroom where those little kids were going in and out of. Put half that bottle back, man. And I came to however long later with my best friend, that second grader, crying. And he had got the director, my boss, pulling me off that toilet, telling me I had 10 minutes to get out of here. They were calling the cops. And I remember looking at that little boy, and he said, Pat, what happened? The last thing I wanted to do was put your kids in harm's way. And I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I need help. You know, I surrender. I surrender. And she sent me to Betty Ford Treatment Center. Went to treatment. Best treatment ever, right? They said, I don't know. What they did was they separated me from alcohol for 28 days. And they talked about this medical model, I don't know, frontal lobe cortex. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, frontal lobe, womp, 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 you know. I'm a people pleaser. I'm just like, yeah, frontal lobe cortex, you know. I wasn't allowed to fraternize. I didn't know what that meant. You know what I mean? There's fraternizing going on here. I could feel it. You know what I'm saying? It's electrifying, you know. But I wrote this girl a note. We fell in love writing notes. 28 days later, full-on love affair, you know. And she had the same sobriety date as me. It was like, woo, is God's will, you know what I mean? And I had to do a 9-month program. She had to do a 9-month program. I ran back to my counselor, Mark. I said, Mark, I'm turning my will and life over to her as I understand God, you know. And I wrote her a note, where should we go to sober living together to live happily ever after? She's like, Hawaii. I'm like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And I made a decision to turn my will and life over to her, and I did, you know. And I thought this was about consequences. I got on the plane, the flight attendant's like, what do you want to drink? Now I'm on my way to sober living to be with my sober girlfriend. The flight attendant asked me what I wanted to drink, and I ordered a Heineken, you know what I'm saying? Because I wasn't an alcoholic, right? I got busted for the heroin, not the alcohol. And so I ordered a Heineken. 12 or 13 Heinekens later, I land in Hawaii, and I get there, and I'm standing like sober living or bar, you know, and I said, I'll go to sober living tomorrow. And I walked in the bar, and I ordered another drink, and that girl ended up overdosing and dying and never making it to Hawaii. But my mom started to go to Al-Anon, which means I'm about to get sober, you know what I mean? Because I call Mom, I'm like, Mom, I need help. And she's like, no. I'm like, what do you mean no? She's like, no's a full sentence. Click, you know. I call her back. I'm like, well, Mom, if I only had a dad, I wouldn't be in this situation. It's all your fault. And I hit that guilt button, and she wires me the money. And I call her and tell her I'm going to try life. She wires me the money. And so what happened, long story short, is she bought me a plane ticket back to Los Angeles. I landed at LAX, and I went straight downtown to Skid Row. And I used to say I lived on Skid Row. I tell you tonight, I survived Skid Row. And the last hustle I had as a straight man, as I wander up to West Hollywood to go in those gay bars, to flirt with those men, to get enough alcohol in my body and hope that I make it out before I black out. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And I start coming to with shame and guilt on a deep, deep level, man. And on the 3 days before I got sober, on the 20th of October, I crawled out of a motel sexually assaulted for the 12th time. And the only solution I have at that moment is to kill myself. I can't imagine putting alcohol into my body anymore because I can't imagine living this life anymore. And I know that if I drink one more time, I'm not going to be able to stop. But I also can't imagine my life without alcohol. And so the only solution I have is to take my life, and I'm going to jump in front of this U-Haul truck at 5:30 in the morning. And I know it's 5:30 in the morning because as I'm about to jump in front of this truck, the thought crossed my mind that a bottle of tequila would be a better idea. And my whole body shifted to the left, and I walked to a liquor store, and I waited 30 minutes for the liquor store to open. And we know what that 30 minutes is like. That 30 minutes of hell. The 30 minutes of screaming and the demons yelling at me. I'm about to snap, man. My body's just, I'm just about to, I can't, the anxiety's so intense, man. And the lady opens that liquor store door, and I get that sense of ease and comfort at once. And I went in that liquor store, and I got that pint of tequila, and I went back on that wall, and I put half that bottle back. And when I put half that bottle back, all that shame and all that guilt and all that remorse and all that fear, man, went away just like that. And I start having a conversation with myself, and that conversation always says, Pat, this time's going to be different. This time you're going to make it right with your mom, and this time you're going to go back to school, and this time you're going to get the job. And one more time, I have that fierce determination to go out there and live this thing called life one more time. And the second thought says, drink that second half of that bottle. And I put that second half of that bottle back, and I blacked out for 3 days. And I came to 3 days later in a motel in Anaheim. I called my mom, Collect, and I said, Mom, I need help. And my mom said, I can't help you anymore. She said, just stay right where you are, and someone from Alcoholics Anonymous will come and get you. She said, if I come and get you, I'm going to end up killing you. And she hung up on me. And I'm so grateful my mom didn't come and get me that night, because I would have manipulated her for $20 more, and I can guarantee you I wouldn't be standing here tonight. And my mom called this goof an Alcoholics Anonymous, man. This guy was the biggest bozo in Alcoholics Anonymous. His hair was big, he was loud, he was obnoxious, he was annoying, I couldn't stand him. But he answered the phone in one ring, and my mom said, I need help with my son. He said, where's he at? He didn't say, have the kid call me. He said, where's he at? And my mom gave him the address, man, and he had just gotten off the phone with this doctor that told him he had stage 4 cancer and he had 6 months to live. And he knew that if he didn't treat his alcoholism, he wasn't going to make it 6 months. And he went and grabbed a new guy, because we don't do 12-step calls alone. And they barged in that motel, man. The guy came in, he's like, my name's Jack, I'm an alcoholic. And I was like, the other guy was on a walker. He's like, my name's John, I got 90 days sober. You know what I mean? And I was just sitting there going, these guys are losers. You know what I'm saying? Like, what, these idiots? You know, here I am judging the good folks that came for fun and for free. He didn't care if I was an addict, an alcoholic from the streets and not the streets, prison, jail. He didn't care about any of that. He just said, come with me, kid. And I got off the bed, and I followed that guy to that motel, and he said, get in the van. And if you're new, just get in the car. Something happens in the car, man. I didn't know, man. I got in the van, you know. I'm in the van. These guys are like, oh, man, I drink and I go to the hospital. Yeah, I drink and I go to the hospital, too. You know, they're drinking, hospital, laughing, you know. And I'm just going, are they ever going to let me talk about me? You know what I'm saying? And before he knew it, I ended up at Charlie Street, man. In Charlie Street, low-bottom indigent detox, man. No therapist, no Suboxone, no anxiety meds, no cute therapist to catch a crush on. You know what I'm saying? You know, none of that. Here's a bottle of Pepto. Good luck, you know. 10 days. And members of Alcoholics Anonymous that came and read that big book word for word and line for line. And he broke down his disease just like this. He said, when I put alcohol into my body, I can't stop until I'm in the hospital. And he looked at me, he goes, what happens to you when you drink? I go to jail. He goes, hey, Pete, come on over. And this Pete guy came waddling over. And Jack goes, when you drink, what happens to you? He goes, I go to prison. I go, I don't. I go to jail. Pete goes, hey, John, come over here. John came over. John went to jail too. Orale! John grabbed Kyle, grabbed Ty. You know, next thing you know, there's like 5 or 6 of us. We're all drink, we go to jail, telling our story, telling our story, telling our story, telling our story, telling our story. And then he swindled in. He goes, Pat, when you're in jail, do you want to go back to jail? I'm like, sometimes, you know. He goes, but the times you don't, what happens? I go, my mom comes and sees me with that look of disappointment in the glass. You know that look? Man, Mom, I promise I don't want to do this anymore. And I go to the H&I, and I go to church, and I give my life up, and I'm sitting in the holding tank and I have a conversation with myself. He said, what did the conversation say? I said, it always starts off with, you know what, Pat, alcohol is not your problem. If you don't smoke crack cocaine, you'll be all right. And so I'm in the holding tank waiting to get released. And I have a conversation with that conversation with myself, and all of a sudden I get released and I go to the liquor store and I get that 12-pack of beer because alcohol is not my problem. And I put 1 beer down, 2 beers down, 3 beers down. Next thing you know, I'm down the street. He goes, what happened down the street? I said, I met a new friend. Now we're business partners, you know. He said, what happened? I said, I ended up back in jail. He goes, oh, that's great. What happened that time? And so I start telling him all the thinking that precedes my first drink. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm this, I'm that. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm this or that. I'm always pick up alcohol. I always end up back in jail. And he looked at me and said, if you can concede both propositions, physical, when you put alcohol into your body, you can't stop and end up in jail. And more importantly, with a sober mind, do you have a mind that's driving you back to the thing that's going to kill you? He said, you might be alcoholic. And he left me in that silence like that long enough. For the first time in my life, I couldn't lie to myself. I was more surprised than anyone at Charlie Street. I was like, I'm alcoholic, you know. He lit up like a chandelier. He's like, I got a new guy, you know. And I didn't come to believe in God, man. I came to believe that guy had joy in his heart when he walked his daughter down the aisle. He talked about having happiness every Saturday when he watched his grandkids play baseball. I came to believe that I too could have joy and happiness for another human being. Step 2, I turned my will and life over to a God I didn't believe in. If you're new or struggling with God, I didn't believe in God until I was 8 years sober. But I don't care. It's my opinion. I don't think God cares what your intention is. God cares what your action is. Because I got on my knees and I read the 3rd step prayer with my sponsor, even though I didn't believe. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me, to do with me. Amen. He goes, no, there's no amen. It's at the end of step 7. You know, I'm like, oh, whoa, you know. And I wrote an inventory. I read it to him. I even did the 7-step prayer, even though I didn't believe in God. My creator, I'm now willing they should have all of me, good and bad. Right? Don't care. I don't think God cared. Because God was going to use that for the next 8 years, which we're not going to get into. But I was already making amends at 4 days sober. 4 days sober. I was already on my 8th step. And my sponsor was like, you know, he said, hey, you got to do a sober living. And I was like, no, I got to go to the Salvation Army. He goes, why? I go, because I have a warrant. He goes, oh, great. We're going to turn you in tomorrow, you know. And I was like, whoa, bro, no. He's like, no. He's like, you're sober now. You're on your 9th step. Everything's going to work out all right. And you have God in your life. And I was like, no, remember, I don't believe in God. He goes, you could borrow mine, you know. I was like, this guy, but I'm a people pleaser. And I think God used my people pleasing to get me moving. And he put me in a suit. I go show up to the court. The court says, Mr. Ochoa, do you remember the last time you were in my courtroom? I said, yes, I do. Judge said, what did I tell you? He said, you said you were going to sentence me to 3.5 years in prison if you saw me in your courtroom again. He said, you're absolutely right. Cuffed me up, took me down to the holding tank, and I'm walking down to go to prison for 3.5 years, and my mind starts going. Why'd you trust that guy, man? You never trusted men your whole life. Every coach has failed you. Your father failed you, man. Every man in your life has failed you. And one more time, you put your trust in another man, and another man's failed you. And I got on my knees, and I said, God, I don't believe that you exist, but John Ackerlin, rest in peace, told me to pray. Get me the heck out of here, will you? Amen. Well, John's God doesn't work. Jack, my sponsor's God doesn't work because I get on the bus to go to prison. And I don't realize at the time that I'm sitting out looking outside the window contemplating with God. But I'm having a conversation with God saying, for the first time in my life, I want to be sober. For the first time in my life, I really want to do this thing, and I'm going to prison. And the door closed, and the engine started. And the door opened, and the guard came on, and the guard says, Ochoa? And 3 of us raised our hand, you know, and the guard said, Patrick? You know, the other 2 dudes were pissed, you know what I mean? And I went in front of the judge, and the judge goes, Mr. Ochoa? I said, yes, sir. He said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to give you another chance. He said, there's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he pointed to this side of the courtroom. He goes, that guy's been fighting for you all day to get out. And if you're new, that's what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous for one another. We fight for each other's lives one day at a time. He said, but you're going straight to the Salvation Army, no stops in between. Yes, sir, absolutely. And I showed up to the Salvation Army, and the guy that answered the phone, my sponsor said, I got this kid, Pat Ochoa. Tim P. was a guy I used to get loaded with. And see, God's working in my life. Though I don't believe, Though I don't even know, God's working in my life. I can't tell you, like I can't look in the windshield and go, oh my God, there's God. Oh my God, there's... I look in the rear view mirror and I could see how God's fingerprints are through my whole life. You know what I mean? And somewhere along the line, AA boy met AA girl on AA campus. I don't even know how I got a girlfriend, to be honest with you, man. How'd this happen? You know, she's like, I don't know. And then she got pregnant, and I was like, I don't know how that happened either, you know. And but I tried every manipulation tactic to get rid of that kid. You know what I mean? I did, man. I didn't know. I was scared. I didn't know I could be loved or loved on the level that I love my son, you know. And she worked, and I went to school, and we had an agreement, and I took care of my kid every day of his life, you know. And thank God for the women. You guys would share about how the father of your child didn't pay child support or didn't show up for visitation. And through your pain, I learned how to be financially responsible. I learned how to show up for my son through your pain. And I appreciate and I respect the women in Alcoholics Anonymous for teaching me how to be a father. And I would call you, and I'm like, he has the hiccups. What do I do? You're like, what do you do when you have the hiccups? So I'm like, wait. You're like, perfect. Hang up on me, you know. One time he cried. I put him on my head, and he didn't cry up there, man. I was so proud. I was like, you know what I mean? And I remember asking my sponsor, I go, why do we got to do all this service work, man? Right? He looked at me and goes, 5% of AA do 95% of the work. He goes, you need to be in the 5%. I didn't know what that meant. He said, yeah. He said, you think drugs and alcohol are your problem? He says, man, that's not the problem. That's a symptom. That's a symptom of the problem. He said, your problem is that you're selfish and you're self-centered. Go help that guy. He goes, what we're going to do here in Alcoholics Anonymous is turn you into a giver. I thought I was going to be the Dalai Lama or something, you know what I mean? But all of a sudden, I was at my house, and I had my kid, and my sponsee was there, and I stood up, and I put my son on my head, and I put his head right into a ceiling fan. It was like, whack, whack, whack. And I was like, oh, my God. And my sponsee grabbed my kid, and I went to the back room, and I got on my knees, and I was like, God, I don't believe that you exist, but old man John told me to pray. What the hell do I do? I heard, you need to call the doctor, dude. You know what I mean? I was like fucking profound. I called the doctor. He told me what to do. I looked at my son. There was just a little bump on his head. But what happened for me in that moment was that I cared more about another human being than I cared about myself. Selfishness and self-centeredness walked through the door on the 23rd of October of 2002. By continuing to be one of the 5% that do 95% of the work each day, I become a little bit less self-centered and selfish, you know? That man didn't lie to me. 90 days sober, I made amends to my mom. She was like, it's about time, you know? And I made amends to my mom. I said, remember that one time I told you I got in an accident? I go, it was a lie. She goes, I know. Remember that one time? She just stopped me. She goes, I know that every time you asked for money, she said, I know that you lied. And I was like dumbfounded. I was like, then why'd you give me the money? And she said, because when you left my house at 17, you broke my heart. She said, I stayed up every day for 10 years terrified I was going to get the call that you bled out and I was going to have to come identify the body. Dude, and I got really present to how my behavior affected another human being. It wasn't the lie. It was that I robbed my mom of her security day in and day out for one more, man. And I just broke. I just started crying, and I looked at my mom, and I said, Mom, what can I do to make this right? And she said, I just want you to get in the middle of AA and help as many people as you can. And I gave my mom a hug, and my mom said, Patrick, I want you to know I love you very much. And I was 27 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt love from my mom. And I ran back to my sponsor. I was like, this AA thing's amazing. I want to make more amends. He said, yeah, but what about the money, kid? I said, she don't want the money. He said, yeah, but AA wants you to pay it back, you know. I thought this guy bumped his head. I'm not paying it back, you know. I go, how am I going to pay her back $100,000? He goes, $25 at a time, you know. And I was like, oh, my God. He goes, I want you to write a note that says, Mom, I love you and I appreciate you today, and leave her $25. Mom, I love you and I appreciate you today. Leave her $25. Mom, I love you and I appreciate you. Leave her $25. And so I did every week. Mom, I love you and I appreciate you. $25 every week, $25. And then my sponsor gave me an attaboy. He said, Pat, come on over here. He goes, you're doing such a good job in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was like, yeah, you know. He said, I want you to write the note every day. I'm like, that's a punishment, you know. And he goes, I want you to write a memory in there. So I did. I started writing this note. Mom, I remember when I was 10, and Mom was one time I went to Hawaii, you know, and one time they even had a little teardrop on there. I circled it, you know, crying, you know, and I don't know, man. I was 5 years sober, and my mom looked. She called me to dinner. She said, I no longer want the money anymore. She said, but I still want the notes, you know. Man, thank God for strong sponsorship. I remember calling my sponsor, like, I'm not doing this anymore. And he told me, you don't have to do it anymore. She said, but how free do you want to be? And I can tell you, I wrote my mom a note or sent my mom a text every day to the day that my mom died. And I would have missed the miracle, man. I would have missed the miracle. And he said, 10 more minutes, right? And man, that son of mine, he when he was in second grade, he got scared to eat. You know what I mean? I was like, you got to eat. And I was scared that he's not going to eat forever. And I thought he was going to die. All of a sudden, I had an intuitive thought that said, pray with your kid. We started praying before dinner time. And then he got afraid to go to bed at night because he was afraid to die in his sleep. He was going to miss his dad. I don't hear miss your dad. I hear not following my directions. So I argue with him for 3 days and have an intuitive thought that says, pray with your kid. Wow, profound, you know. So I start praying with my kid at dinner time, and I start praying with my kid at meal time, and then all of a sudden he goes to school and he doesn't want to go to school because he's afraid he's going to die at school. And I said, and I have this faith, this confident trust born of experience that shows me when I get irritated with my kid, it doesn't help, but when we pray, it helps. And so we say a prayer, and I go, eat it, and I go, when your dad's afraid, what do you do? What do I do? He goes, you go be a service in AA. I go, how can you be a service at school? He goes, I don't know, I'm going to go find out. And he went to school, and I went to work, and I picked him up. He said, Dad, you won't believe it. I said, what happened? He said, I saw a kid way out on the playground, and he was crying, and I ran up, and I introduced myself. Hi, I'm Eden. And I said, well, why was he crying? He said, because his parents told me he was going to get a divorce. They were going to get a divorce, and he was going to have to stay at his mom's half-time and his dad's half-time. And my son had been living like that for 6 years. And he was able to be of service to that boy, right, and show him how he'd been able to get through it. And my son learned how to get through his fear through prayer and service. And I was speaking in Portland, Oregon. I came home on a Sunday. I picked him up, and I got in the car, and he was restless. I was restless, you know what I mean? He goes, Dad, did you forget to pray? I was like, you know? And so he said a prayer, and we got some food, and we showed up to my apartment, and I go inside and separate the food, and this girl was punching windows, and she was screaming about her boyfriend, and I said, God, please direct my next action. And the girl walked up to me, and I got the knife out of her hand. She had cut her arms all up and down, and she said, can I use your phone? God answered my prayer. I gave her my phone, and she called her dad, and I said, God, please direct my next action. And she said, my dad wants to talk to you. If I don't lean into God, I can't hear the action. I knew what I was supposed to do. I got on the phone. Her dad said, I don't know you. It's going to take me an hour to get there. He said, can you take my daughter inside your house and keep her safe? I said, absolutely. And I took her inside, and I cleaned off her arms, and I bandaged up her arms, and I said, I'll be right back. And I went into the dining room where my son had separated the food, and he had separated the food into 3 plates. He said, Dad, do you think she wants to eat? I said, I don't know. Why don't you go ask her? And he walked into the bathroom, and she was crying, and he looked at her. He said, every time I'm sad, he said, I pray. Will you pray with me? And he's holding her hands, and he's saying a prayer with her, and I turn around. I get a look into the bathroom, and I just start to cry, man. And I'm crying because of my gratitude for Alcoholics Anonymous. And he goes, every time I'm done praying, he goes, I meditate. Will you meditate with me? She was stuck, you know what I mean? He's breathing God in, breathing fear out, breathing God in, He comes over and he sits down. She didn't want to eat, and he says a prayer, and he thanks God for bringing this girl into our hearts so we could be of service. And the dad calls me, and he goes, Dad, I want to go. And he walks right up to Dad. He goes, hi, I'm Eden. He goes, we want to thank you for allowing us to be of service to your daughter. And he turned around and walked away, you know what I mean? And I wanted to ask that kid to be my sponsor, you know what I mean? I was like, what the heck, you know what I mean? I was like, yeah, what he said, you know what I mean? And I'm going to end on my mom. I didn't want to talk about her. I tried to avoid her because it's too painful, but I was, my mom rocked an oxygen tank like nobody's business. I think she talked here with an oxygen tank, you know what I'm saying? And, oh man, my mom every Monday I had to make living amends to my mom. I'd drive an hour, rush hour traffic, to have dinner with her, to bark at me for biting my nail. She was grumpy all the time, you know what I mean? I remember I said to my friend Michelle, I said, I'm not doing this anymore. This is abuse, you know? And she said, you're going to have to teach your mom how to love you. My mom was 40 years sober, man. I was 39 years old, you know, still acting like I was 5. Wanted my mom to love her 5-year-old son, you know? And I had to do some work, and what I came to learn was that my mom was thrown through a plate glass window by her alcoholic father. And my mom had an inability to love me the way I deserved to be loved as a child, you know? But I had to let go of that.
And I had to teach my mom how to love me. And I would grab my mom and I'd kiss her on the forehead. She was like hugging a cactus, you know what I mean? Right? You know what I'm saying? But I'd kiss her on the forehead and she's like, yeah, you know. And she had the oxygen tank and we were speaking in Nebraska together. And I'm like, Mom, get in the wheelchair. I'm not getting that goddamn. I said, Mom, get in the wheelchair. I'm not getting. We're going back and forth. And finally I looked at my mom and I go, Mom, when are you going to let me love you? My mom sat in the wheelchair, man. Dude, I was so proud. I was walking with my mom. I was like, yeah, you know what I mean? Then I got a bright idea, and I started running through the hospital, the airport. She's like, stop, flipping me off. And we got to the bottom of the thing, and something changed in our relationship, man. Just like that, something changed. And I didn't know what the change was. And we got back to the hotel, and I said, Mom, I love you. And I gave her a kiss. I said, I'll see you in the morning. She said, I love you, and she gave me a kiss. She said, I'll see you in the morning. And I woke up in the morning, and I got in the shower, and my mom had snuck in there and put a red dye tablet in the shower head, and I turned the water on. All this red water's coming out. I get out of the shower, and she's like, got him, you know what I mean? And what happened was our relationship turned from authoritative mom-son relationship to a friend relationship. And my mom got a tumor that blocked the passageway of her breathing, and we went to the hospital, and they cored out the tumor, and they put her on hospice. And my mom said, I'm only going on hospice to get off hospice. And I'd go sit there and watch my mom, and she'd say, don't sit here and watch me die. She said, go out there and live your life, will you? She said, come back tomorrow morning and give me a kiss. I'd come back in the morning, and the women in Alcoholics Anonymous, she'd be brushing her hair and loving on my mom. And I'd give her a kiss, and I'd sit there and watch her, and she'd say, don't sit here and watch me die. She said, go out there and live your life, but come back tomorrow and give me a kiss, will you? And I'd give her a kiss, and I got asked to speak in Idaho and Boise, and I don't want to miss my mom's last breath, you know? And I'm praying, and I'm like, God, I don't know what to do. And I heard in meditation, you need to be a service to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't like that answer, so I pray 2 days in a row, and I get the same answer. I don't like it, so I pray 3 days in a row, I get the same answer. You know, finally I call the sponsor. What do I do? The sponsor said, what did God want you to do? I went and gave my mom a kiss. I said, I'll see you. I'll be back. And I went to Idaho, and I get a call from my friend Michelle. She said, your mom's been unresponsive for 3 days. She said, you need to hurry up and get back. Your mom wants to say goodbye before she leaves. And I got on my knees in front of 1,000 people, and I said, God, I don't know what you want from me, but I'm willing to do whatever it is. And I heard the message loud and clear. You need to be a service to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I gave a talk that night. I woke up in the morning. I got on the plane. I flew home, man. I got in my car, went 100 miles an hour down that road, and I walked into my mom's. Now, my mom hadn't moved in 3 days. She hadn't said a word. I moved in 3 days, and I walked into where she was on hospice, and my mom sat straight up like this. Spirit felt spirit walk in the room that day. The 10th step promise says, we have entered the world of the Spirit. And I went into my mom's arms, and she held on to me, and she said, Pato, I want you to know you did the right thing. She held me, and she said, Pat, she said, I love you, I love you, I love you. And that was the last words that my mom said, man. And day 2, 3 days later, my mom died, and my heart broke. But I can tell you exactly what happened for me in that moment, and I believe what happened for my mom in that moment was there was a level of forgiveness that was so profound, man. All my mom wanted from me was to get in the middle of you and help as many alcoholics as I could, and I honored my mom's amends the day that my mom died. That same son, man, he just graduated high school with a 4.5 grade point average. Nice. I asked him, how'd you get the 0.5? He said, honors. You know, what the fuck's honors, you know? He applied for 3 colleges, and he got into FIT, which is a Fashion Institute Technology, as a fashion design major, on his own, no formal education. I was the model for his little outfits he made, you know? And I asked him, I said, what would you equate your success to? He said, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, Dad, that fast. He said, every member of Alcoholics Anonymous that's told their story, man, has touched my son's life. Right? The impact that we have is a lot more bigger than the impact on me, but the impact on our families. If you're new here in Alcoholics Anonymous, my message tonight is that Alcoholics Anonymous is a lot more than just not drinking. This is about growing up. And it's my prayer every night, if you're new, you find a sponsor in this room that has a working knowledge of that book. My name is Pat, I'm an alcoholic, and I love you all.
All right, let's thank Pat again. Great job.